Did you love her? Amara asked, her voice so steady it made the room colder. When you put my ring on another woman's hand? Han So-jun did not answer right away. The ballroom lights turned the gold on his watch into fire. 3 little boys stood between them in miniature black suits, breathing hard, one of them clutching a ring that never should have left her in the first place. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough to make everybody lean in. "No," he said. "I was trying to keep you alive." But that was not how the story began. It began on the 12th of November, under a sky the color of bruised steel, with rain hitting the back entrance of the Hanul Grand Hotel and the smell of burnt sugar clinging to Amara Okafor's sweater. Amara was 28, Nigerian-American, alone in Seoul, and 2 paychecks away from falling apart in public. She had long, knotless braids that brushed the middle of her back, and a small gap between her front teeth she only showed when she forgot herself enough to laugh. That morning, her landlord had taped a final notice to her apartment door. By noon, her supervisor had cut her banquet shifts. By 6, the hospital in Atlanta had called to say her aunt's surgery bill could not wait any longer. And at 6:17 p.m., while Amara was carrying a tray of sugar roses through the service corridor, with cold rain still drying on her shoes, the service elevator doors opened and a heavy gold ring spun across the floor toward her. It stopped against the toe of her black work shoe. A second later, the man who had dropped it stepped inside. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so clean it looked expensive even under service hall fluorescent light, and there was blood darkening the white cuff at his wrist. The elevator doors slid shut, and the story began. The elevator jerked once, hard enough to rattle the tray in Amara's hands. 1 sugar rose slid off and hit the floor. The man looked at the rose first, then the ring by her foot, then her. He had the kind of face that made silence feel deliberate. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair falling over his forehead, a mouth that looked almost gentle until you noticed there was nothing soft in his eyes. Not cruel, just controlled. Too controlled. Amara set the tray down on the metal shelf with care, because if those sugar roses shattered, Chef Min would act like she had murdered somebody. Then she bent, picked up the ring, and held it out. "You dropped this." He took it without touching her skin. His fingers were rough, knuckles marked, 1 tattoo visible under the cuff near the bone of his wrist. Not loud tattoos, old ones. The kind people got before they had something to lose. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low and even. No panic. No apology for bleeding in a service elevator like that was a normal thing for a Thursday. Amara looked at his wrist. "You're getting blood on the floor." That made something shift in his expression. Not amusement, not exactly. More like surprise discovering itself. "Most people notice the blood first," he said. "Most people don't have to clean it." The elevator stuttered again and stopped between floors. The overhead light flickered once, then steadied to a weak yellow hum. Amara closed her eyes for half a second. Not now. Not with the rent notice still folded in her apron pocket. Not with her phone at 12% battery. Not with sugar roses waiting and Chef Min already irritated because she was late back from the loading dock. The man reached past her and pressed the emergency call button. Nothing. He pressed it again. Still nothing. "Perfect," Amara muttered. "You're not afraid." She looked at him. "The elevator being broken isn't the most stressful thing that happened to me today." There was more blood at his cuff now. Not gushing, not dramatic, just steady enough to matter. She sighed, pulled a clean napkin from her apron, and held it toward him. "Use pressure." He looked at the napkin like nobody had handed him anything ordinary in a long time. "You always give medical instructions to strangers?" "Only the bleeding ones." This time, it was definitely amusement. Brief, dangerous only because it changed his whole face for a second, and then disappeared. He took the napkin. Footsteps thundered in the hallway outside. Male voices, urgent. The man's head turned slightly toward the sound. His whole body changed. Not tense. Worse. Still. He moved in front of her without asking. Amara blinked. The footsteps passed. A door slammed somewhere far down the corridor. Then silence again, except for the hum of the bad light and the rain tapping metal outside the loading bay. He stepped back. "You should not be working in a hotel that locks its staff in elevators," he said. "You should not be bleeding on hotel property." He looked at her for a long moment. She said it honest. Not rude, not kind. The kind of honesty that most people buried because it cost too much. "You always talk to strangers like that?" he asked. "Only the ones who need to hear it," she said. The emergency light finally flashed green. The elevator jolted and moved. When the doors opened on the ballroom service floor, 2 men in black suits were waiting outside. Both of them bowed their heads, not to her, to him. "Sir," one said, relief obvious and immediate. The stranger stepped out, then looked back once. "Wash the sugar from your hand before it burns your skin," he said. Amara looked down. In the chaos, one of the hot syrup roses had split against her thumb. Sticky heat stung the skin there. She had not even noticed. She hated that he had. Then he turned and walked away with both men falling into place behind him. Amara watched him go. In all the noise and rush of that long day, that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because sitting on the metal floor where he had been standing was a small black card with nothing on the front except one embossed silver character. And in the bottom corner, almost hidden, a single name. Han. The next night, the ballroom smelled like lilies, champagne, and money. The Hanu Grand was hosting a foundation dinner for half the city's powerful men and all the women who smiled beside them. Amara was back in a pressed black uniform, carrying trays and pretending she didn't have 2 blisters and a landlord waiting for money she did not have. She had almost forgotten the card. Then the doors at the front of the hotel opened. Black cars lined the entrance outside like a funeral procession with better tailoring. Security shifted before he even stepped in. Managers straightened. The room changed shape around absence and fear and respect all at once. Then he walked in. Same black suit, different tie. No blood this time. Han So-jun. Conversations bent around him. A man near the bar lowered his glass and whispered the name under his breath, like it might cut him if spoken too loudly. The chairman. Another man shook his head. Ghost of soul. Amara's tray went heavier in her hands. So that was who he was. Not just rich, not just important. The kind of important that made other important people move first. On either side of him walked men with the stillness of trained violence. Ahead of him, hotel executives bowed. Not the shallow little social bend people gave donors. The real kind. The careful kind. At his left was a woman in cream silk with straight black hair and a smile too polished to trust. She rested manicured fingers lightly on his arm, as if claiming public space. She saw Amara at the same moment Amara saw her, and that smile cooled by 2 degrees. Sojun's gaze moved across the room once, dismissed 20 people, and stopped on Amara like he had expected to find her there. That did something ugly to her heartbeat. He crossed the room after speaking quietly into a phone. Whatever he said emptied half the path ahead of him. Amara set her tray down before her hands could tell on her. When he stopped in front of her, the ballroom noise went distant. "You burned your hand," he said, glancing at the faint red mark near her thumb. "You lied by omission." One of his bodyguards shifted. Not him. "I didn't lie." "You forgot the part where the whole city looks ready to kneel when you enter a room." His eyes stayed on her face. "Would it have changed anything in the elevator?" "Yes." She stepped closer because anger worked better than fear, and she had practice with anger. "I would have known not to waste a napkin on you." Something flickered in his expression. Not offense. Approval, almost, which made her angrier. The woman in cream silk arrived beside him. "Sojun," she said smoothly, her gaze moving over Amara's uniform and lingering there just long enough to insult. "The press are waiting." Amara looked from the woman to him. "You brought a date." The woman's smile returned. "I'm Sol Yedin." "Good for you," Amara said. Yedin's smile thinned. Sojun said nothing for a beat. Then, quietly, "Go home after your shift. Don't stop anywhere." Amara laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You don't get to tell me what to do." "No," he said. "I'm telling you what someone else is going to try." Before she could ask what that meant, the event coordinator rushed over, pale and sweating. "Miss Okafor, table 12 needs champagne immediately." Amara looked at Sojun one last time. "Whatever your world is," she said, keeping her voice low, "keep it away from mine." Then she turned and walked. She did not look back. He watched her go. In 15 years of running his empire, nobody had walked away from him first. If you're watching this and you can already see where this is going, drop a heart 4 in the comments. Because this man is about to make a very big mistake called feelings. Amara finished her shift at midnight. By 12:08, she was out the staff entrance with cold air under her coat and her phone buzzing in her pocket. Unknown number. She answered on the second ring. No voice, just breathing. Then a woman's voice, soft and smiling and wrong. "Leave Sol," she said, "or next time he won't be there to make the room feel safe." The call ended. Amara stood still in the dark alley behind the hotel, neon light reflecting in rainwater, and looked across the street without knowing why. A black sedan idled at the curb. When it pulled away, she caught one last glimpse through the tinted window. A man in the passenger seat, watching to make sure she got home. The next 3 days went bad in ways that felt almost organized. Her landlord, who usually barely looked at her, suddenly became very interested in lease violations. A customer she had never met filed a complaint with the hotel, accusing her of theft. Someone cut the brake line on Dami's borrowed scooter, and Dami only found out because the mechanic cursed loud enough for the whole block to hear. And on Sunday afternoon, when Amara went to the small community arts center in Itaewon, where she volunteered to teach children simple piano scales, she found Han Sojun standing alone in the hallway, looking at a wall of crooked crayon drawings. The room smelled like dust, crayons, and old radiator heat. One paper sun had fallen half off the corkboard. He was staring at it like it mattered. For 8 full seconds, the most feared man in Seoul looked 12 years old and lost. Amara stopped in the doorway. "Are you following me?" He turned slowly. He was not wearing a suit this time. Dark coat, black sweater, no tie. Somehow that made him look more dangerous, not less. I'm making sure other people aren't. That's not an answer. It's the one I'm giving you. The piano room behind her filled with children's laughter and wrong notes. One little girl ran past clutching a tambourine. So-jun moved automatically out of the child's path without even looking down. Amara caught that. You fund this place, she said. Yes. Why? It needed money. That's not why people like you do things. His gaze returned to the drawing on the wall. A child had colored the sky purple and the grass blue. One corner read in crooked Korean letters, "For my brother." When I was young, he said, someone paid for my sister's piano lessons for 6 months. We never found out who. The silence after that was thin and strange. Amara leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. You had a sister? He nodded once. Nothing else. Not explanation, not pity. Just a crack in the wall, there and gone. Inside the classroom, a child called, Teacher Amara! She turned her head and answered in Korean, 2 minutes. When she looked back, he was watching her with that same unreadable focus. You're different here, he said. This is the only place people listen when I say sit down. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. Then her phone buzzed. A picture message. Her apartment door, broken open. The next photo was worse. Her mother's framed picture, the one object she had brought all the way from Atlanta, wrapped in 2 sweaters and a prayer, shattered on the floor. Under it, written in red lipstick across the wall, he doesn't keep things he gets tired of. The air left her in one sharp motion. So-jun held out his hand. Phone. No. Amara. She hated that her name sounded steady in his mouth when everything else had tipped. She handed him the phone anyway. His expression did not change as he looked at the photos. That was somehow worse than rage would have been. He gave the phone back. Sunho, he said to the man who had appeared soundlessly at the end of the hall. Send a team. Now. Then to her, you're coming with me. She laughed once because if she didn't, she might do something embarrassing like fall apart in a hallway full of children's drawings. I don't need you. He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that measured and calculated and came to a conclusion. No, he agreed quietly. You don't. That's what makes this interesting. I'm not moving into your world because some spoiled woman with a manicure and a phone made a threat. She didn't break your door herself. That stopped her. He stepped closer, not enough to corner, just enough that she caught the clean cedar scent of his coat and the colder metal scent that always seemed to follow him, like rain on steel. This is not jealousy, he said. This is escalation. From who? He held her gaze. Someone who wants leverage. And I'm leverage now? You were the first night in the elevator. I made the mistake of noticing. There it was. Not romance, not softness. Truth with its teeth out. Amara looked past him into the classroom where the children were hitting wrong notes on purpose and laughing so hard they could barely stand. Then she looked back. If I come with you, she said, it's temporary. Yes. If I want to leave, I leave. His pause was brief. If it's safe. That's not the same thing. No, he said. It isn't. She should have refused. Any woman with good instincts would have refused. But her apartment was broken open. Her mother's picture was in pieces. And the only person in the city who looked less shaken by this than her was the man standing in front of her, speaking like violence was a logistics problem he could solve before dinner. So she nodded once and entered his world. Sojun's penthouse sat above the Han River like it had never been touched by ordinary weather. 47 floors up, the air smelled faintly of cedar, leather, and the kind of expensive quiet money bought when it no longer needed to be loud. The windows were taller than any room Amara had ever slept in. The floors were warm under her bare feet. He noticed she was cold before she said a word. By the time she came out of the guest bathroom in borrowed clothes, soft black sweater, gray lounge pants, both too long in the sleeves, the heat had been turned up 2 degrees. She noticed that. She noticed more when she entered the kitchen and found a covered bowl waiting on the counter. Steam rose when she lifted the lid. Pepper soup. Not exact. Seoul version. But close enough that the smell hit somewhere under her ribs before she could stop it. She turned. "You had someone stalk my appetite too? I heard you tell your friend at the arts center you only miss home when you're sick or sad." His tie was gone now. White shirt sleeves rolled once. No jacket. The tattoos on his hands were clearer in the low light. Ink across the knuckles, old enough to have faded at the edges. That was one conversation. It was enough. She should not have liked that. She set the lid back down harder than necessary. "This is how people end up trapped," she said. "A man does one thoughtful thing, and suddenly they start explaining away everything else." He leaned one hip against the kitchen island. "I wasn't aware I asked to be explained away." "You didn't. You just keep appearing." "Yes." "Why?" His gaze held hers. "Because after your door was broken, the idea of not knowing where you are became a problem." The room went too quiet. Amara reached for the soup just to have something to do with her hands. He watched her take the first spoonful and said nothing. That somehow felt more intimate than if he'd asked whether she liked it. Tension with him never arrived loudly. It gathered. In the days that followed, it moved through the penthouse like weather. He took calls in Korean with his voice so calm it made other men sound afraid. She accused him of trying to control everything within 10 feet of him. He answered, correctly, that 10 feet was an underestimate. She told him people like him mistook possession for protection. He said people like her mistook exhaustion for independence. The arguments were not playful. They landed. And because they landed, they mattered. On the 4th night, she came downstairs unable to sleep and found him in the library at 2 a.m., sitting alone under a single lamp with a tiny brass music box open in his hands. The melody was broken. He was repairing it, not delegating it, not handing it to staff, repairing it himself with patient, careful fingers that had no business knowing how to be gentle. He did not see her for a minute. She stayed in the doorway, night air pressing faintly against the glass behind him, and watched the man half the city feared bend over a damaged thing like saving it was an old habit. Finally, he looked up. "You should be asleep." "You should be terrifying." "I can be 2 things." She crossed the room and stopped by the table. "For your sister?" His fingers stilled over the music box key. "Yes." That answer was so bare it changed the air between them. Amara sat down opposite him. The lamp threw soft gold over the scars on his knuckles. She liked music? She liked anything that made a room feel less empty. There was no self-pity in the sentence. just a fact he had long ago learned to carry without dropping. Amara reached out before she could rethink it and touched the brass lid lightly. The hinge was cracked. "So you fix broken things?"
When I can.
"Not people?" Something shifted in his face. People decide for themselves whether they want to be fixed. The music box clicked, caught, then played 3 clean notes. Amara smiled before she could stop it. There it was, the gap in her teeth, quick and unguarded. His eyes dropped to her mouth and stayed there just long enough to be dangerous. She looked away first, not because she was afraid, because she knew exactly what would happen if she didn't. The next afternoon, Yedin came to the penthouse uninvited. Amara heard her before she saw her, heels on marble, sharp and precise, like someone weaponizing elegance. Sunho tried to intercept her, failed only because Sojun allowed her through. Yedin entered the sitting room in winter white and diamonds small enough to pretend they were tasteful. Her perfume reached the room before her voice did. "You're making this difficult," she said, looking at Amara as if she were a stain on linen. "It would have been much easier if you had left when I warned you." Amara stood from the sofa. "I don't take life advice from women who threaten strangers from blocked numbers." Yedin laughed softly. "Strangers? Is that what you think you are?" Sojun said her name once. "Enough." Yedin turned to him, hurt rearranging itself into polish. "You're risking years of careful work for a woman you met in an elevator." Amara's head turned. Yedin caught the movement and smiled. "There," she said. "She didn't know." Sojun went still. That same stillness from the elevator, the one that meant something worse than anger. "What didn't I know?" Amara asked. No one answered quickly enough, so Yedin did. "My father is the only reason the prosecutors haven't buried half the men in this city who want Sojun dead. The alliance matters. The future marriage matters. The ring matters." Marriage. The word hit cold. Amara looked at Sojun. He did not deny it. That hurt in a stupid, immediate way she despised. Yedin saw it and stepped closer, enjoying herself now. "You're temporary," she said. "You were always temporary." Sojun's voice cut across the room like a blade laid flat. "Leave." Yedin looked at him for a long second, then smiled with all her teeth. "To save her," she said softly, "you always end up proving my point." She left. The apartment stayed silent after the door shut. Amara did not move. "Is it true?" "Yes." He never lied fast. She would give him that. "How long were you planning to let me stay here without mentioning there was a bride-shaped problem in the room?" "It isn't like that." "Then what is it like?" He looked out at the dark river beyond the glass. "Necessary." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There it is, your favorite word. Necessary." She folded her arms tight over her chest. "I am getting very tired of men using that word when what they really mean is cruel." He turned back to her. "I'm keeping you alive." "At what cost?" His jaw tightened. He did not answer. And that silence answered enough. That night she packed, not because she had somewhere safe to go, because staying in a place where another woman could walk in and call herself his future while Amara stood there in his borrowed sweater was a kind of humiliation she refused to practice. She zipped her bag, shouldered it, opened the guest room door, and found him there. He had been standing outside the whole time. "You're not leaving," he said. Statement, not request. Amara looked up at him, at the shadow under his eyes, at the raw exhaustion he wore like armor nobody else would have noticed. "Watch me." His gaze dropped to the bag, then returned to her face. "If you walk out tonight, Yedin's father will have you detained before morning." "Then maybe I'll finally know the whole truth." He stepped aside, not blocking, never physically. That was somehow more devastating. "If you go," he said, "Sun-ho will follow at a distance." "I don't want your men near me." "That's unfortunate." She should have shoved past him. Instead, she asked the wrong question. "Why does that ring matter?" He looked at her for a very long time. Then, quietly, "It belonged to my mother." The anger in her chest changed shape. Smaller, sharper, because now she knew what it meant. Not jewelry. Inheritance. Blood. Promise. She set the bag down without meaning to. He saw. Of course he saw. His voice dropped lower. "Hajima." The word should have meant stop. In the way he said it, with his eyes on her face and too much held behind his teeth, it sounded like something else entirely. "Don't keep looking at me like that. Don't be gentle now. Don't make this harder than it already is." "What does that mean?" she asked. He shook his head once. "Go to sleep, Amara."
Okay. If you are still here, and I know you are, drop a Han Sojun in the comments right now. Because this man just said Hajima, and I need you to understand what that meant in that moment. Not stop. Not really. More like, don't do that unless you plan to ruin me. Subscribe if you haven't. Ring the bell. Do not let this story find you without a notification. She did not sleep, not because she was afraid. For the first time in a long time, that was not the reason. At 3:11 a.m., she went to the kitchen for water and found him there, sleeves rolled, tie gone, staring at nothing with one hand braced on the counter. He looked up. She should have turned around. Instead, she crossed the room slowly and stopped within reach. Neither of them spoke. The city below glowed in strips of blue and gold through the glass. His breathing changed first, then hers. He closed the distance between them slowly. The last thing she remembered clearly was his hand at the side of her face and the quiet, certain thought that she was done pretending this was not what she wanted. This story will not tell you everything that happened next. Some things belong only to them. But I will tell you this. When morning came gray over the river, his shirt was hanging from the back of the guest room chair, and neither of them had slept enough to lie convincingly. At noon, Yedin's father called for a press conference. By 6 that evening, every news outlet in Seoul was outside the Han Foundation Winter Gala. And on the central staircase, under chandeliers white as ice, Han Sojun took his mother's ring and slid it onto Seo Yedin's finger. Amada saw it from the upper balcony. She had come down because Sun-ho told her there was movement below, because something in the air had been wrong all day, because Sojun had not looked her in the eye at breakfast. Now she knew why. The applause below sounded muffled, as if the whole room had been stuffed with cloth. Yedin lifted her hand and smiled for the cameras. Sojun's face did not change. That somehow made it worse. No joy, no hesitation, just duty so cold it might as well have been cruelty. Amada stood very still. She didn't cry. She had learned a long time ago that crying in front of the wrong people was a form of surrender. She kept her face still.
She kept her voice level. But her hands, she couldn't stop her hands from shaking just slightly. And he saw it. He saw it, and he said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that would matter yet. She left before the speeches ended. By the time Sojun reached the penthouse, she was gone. So was the second toothbrush. So was the borrowed sweater. So was the chance to explain that Yedin's father had put an arrest warrant with Amada's name on it on the table that morning, and promised it would disappear only if the ring changed hands before sunset. 3 weeks later, in a clinic 2 cities away, Amada looked at a sonogram screen and heard the doctor say the word triplets in careful Korean. She laughed once, then covered her mouth with both hands and sat through the rest of the appointment staring straight ahead. Because if she looked down, if she looked at the tiny, impossible proof that one night had changed the entire shape of her future, she might have turned around and gone back to the man who had put his mother's ring on another woman's finger. She never went back. 6 years passed. Seoul changed. Power shifted. Men rose and fell. Prosecutors were investigated. New buildings appeared where old grief had stood. Amada returned to the city with 3 boys, a teacher's salary, and no patience left for fairy tales dressed as explanations. Her sons were 6. Micah asks before doing dangerous things, which meant he was the least dangerous only in theory. Jay watched everything and missed nothing. Toby, the youngest by 4 minutes, carried audacity like it had been stitched into his little black blazers at birth. They had Sojun's eyes. There was no gentle way to say that. When Han Sojun saw them for the first time at a school winter recital, 3 small boys in formal uniforms arguing in whispers over who had hidden whose bow tie, he stopped walking. The hallway outside the auditorium smelled like dust, crayons, and hot paper lanterns. Amada turned at the exact wrong moment and found him staring. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Toby looked up at him and frowned. "Mama," he said, "that man looks like us." Every blood vessel in Amada's body went cold. Sojun's gaze shifted from one boy to the next, then to her. He did not ask in public. He was still too controlled for that. But the hand at his side closed so tight his knuckles whitened. That had been 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks of questions.
2 weeks of Amara refusing to answer until she knew whether the man in front of her was the same one who had broken her 6 years earlier, or something worse. Something changed enough to hurt her, all over again. Then Yeren found out. Of course she did. Women like her built lives out of finding out. She came to the school unannounced on a Friday afternoon in pearl earrings and pale cashmere, watched the triplets rehearse a song, and smiled the entire time like she wasn't calculating bloodlines and headlines. After she left, Micah found a glossy charity invitation on the classroom piano. Han Foundation Winter Legacy Gala. Guest of honor, Seo Yeren. Amara found the second thing an hour later. A note in Jay's careful handwriting, left under the sugar jar in her kitchen. "Mama, that lady has your ring in the picture. We are going to get it back. Do not be mad. Love. Us." The apartment went silent around her. Then, very loud. She grabbed her coat. Dami, who had come over with plantains and gossip, snatched the note out of her hand and swore under her breath. "I knew those children were too quiet today." Amara was already at the door. "Stay here in case they come back." "Amara." I am not waiting. The gala was across the river in a hotel ballroom, all gold light and cameras. Of course it was. Power liked chandeliers. She got there with cold air in her lungs and fury keeping her upright. Inside, strings played something expensive and forgettable. Guests floated in black and silver. On a giant screen above the stage, a charity reel played images of smiling children over piano music. Seo Yerin stood near the staircase in ivory silk, the ring bright on her hand. Amara saw the boys before anyone else did. Backstage, 3 small black suits slipping between floral arrangements and audio cables with the determination of tiny thieves who believed justice had a dress code. Amara moved fast. So did Yerin. She reached them first. "Well?" Yerin said, smile fixed for nearby donors, while one manicured hand gripped Toby's shoulder just hard enough to leave memory. "You really are his." Amara crossed the last few feet. "Take your hand off my son." Yerin turned. Up close, the sweetness in her perfume made the air sour. "I wondered how long you'd keep them hidden." "I wasn't hiding them from you." "No." Yerin's eyes glittered. "From him." Micah moved behind Amara's leg. Jay stood straighter. Toby stared directly at the ring. "That's my mama's." The words were small. They landed like stones. Several nearby guests turned. Yerin laughed lightly for their benefit and squeezed Toby's shoulder harder. "This?" She lifted her hand. "This was given to me." "By lying," Amara said. Yerin's smile faded. "Careful." "No," Amara said, voice low. "You be careful. You've spent 6 years using a stolen promise like it made you untouchable." Yerin stepped closer. "You should have stayed where I left you." There. Confession always came easiest to people who believed they had already won. Amara slipped her phone into record mode inside her coat pocket and kept her face still. "You left me?" Yerin's eyes flicked to the boys and back. "You really never figured it out. I made sure your messages disappeared. I made sure his search found nothing. I made sure the warrant moved when it needed to. And when he put that ring on my hand, you did exactly what I knew you would do." Amara's nails dug crescent moons into her palm. Behind her, Jay was very quiet. That was never a good sign. Quiet on Jay meant memory. Yerin tilted her head. "The boys are useful, though. The press will love them. Hidden heirs. A tragic mother. A woman with no ring and no proof." Amara smiled then. Small. Sharp. "Actually," she said, "I came with both." Yerin blinked. Across the ballroom, the giant screen flickered. The charity reel vanished. The sound of Yerin's own voice rolled through the speakers, clear and cold. "I made sure your messages disappeared. I made sure his search found nothing. I made sure the warrant moved when it needed to." The room froze. Every head turned. Every camera lifted. Yerin's face emptied. She spun toward the screen, then back at Amara. "You little—" She reached for Amara. A hand closed around her wrist first. Han Seo-jun. He had arrived without Amara hearing him, which somehow felt exactly right. He stood between Yerin and the boys with murder held in perfect posture. The ballroom went breathless. His gaze dropped to Yerin's hand on Amara's arm, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough to terrify. "Nobody touches her. Not anymore." Yerin jerked her wrist free. "You're making a mistake." Seo-jun looked at the screen where her confession looped to a second statement. Her laughter, her voice saying the ring mattered because power mattered, because bloodlines mattered, because he would always choose necessity over feeling. Then he looked back at her. "Mistakes," he said, "are temporary." Security was already moving. Not hers. His. She took one step back, then two. And because cornered people are always most dangerous,
She lunged not at him, but at Micah, snatching the boy toward her like leverage. The room gasped. Amara moved first. Of course she did. She drove her shoulder into Yaren's arm hard enough to break the grip. Micah stumbled free into Jay's hands. Toby, eyes wide with outrage older than 6 years should allow, reached for Yaren's ring hand in the chaos. The ring, loose on fingers that had never earned it, slid. He caught it. For one absurd, holy second, the whole ballroom watched a 6-year-old boy rescue a stolen inheritance like he had practiced for it in another life. He turned immediately, not to Seo-jun, to Amara. "Mama," he said, opening his little fist. "Here." The gold ring lay in his palm, warm from the wrong hand, home again. At the same moment, Yaren's father burst through the side entrance with 2 men and the frantic energy of power, realizing it might not survive the night. He pointed at Amara. "She fabricated that recording." "No," came Sunho's voice from the sound booth above, calm as winter. "The hotel logs, call records, and internal transfers are also queued." The main screens changed again. Bank transfers, call lists, archived warrants, dates, names. Yaren's father's face went gray under the light. Guests started murmuring, then filming, then stepping back from him like corruption could stain silk. Seo-jun never looked away from Yaren. She laughed once, high and cracking. "You would destroy all of this for her?" His answer came without hesitation. "I should have done it 6 years ago." Yaren's composure shattered. "This city is mine too." Seo-jun stepped forward. She stepped back. For the first time all night, fear showed plainly in her face. He moved no faster, did not shout, did not threaten. That was what made him lethal. "Listen carefully," he said. "You had safety. You had distance. You had my refusal to bury you when I learned what you had done." His eyes dropped briefly to the triplets, then returned to her. "You should have stayed there." She hit the edge of the stage stairs. No room left. His voice dropped to almost nothing. "Ne jeoya." The Korean words were for her guards, for the room, for anyone stupid enough to misunderstand the line he was drawing. Mine. Not as ownership over Amara, as warning to the world that harm moved no further. Then Amara did the thing that finished it. Not him. Her. She stepped to the side, lifted her phone, and sent the recording plus the screen files to every journalist tag she had found on the gala's press sheet while riding over in the taxi. The notification sounds began across the room like rain. One reporter shouted a question. Another called Yaren's father by name. A third already had the arresting prosecutor on speaker. Power did what it always did when bright enough light found it. It ran. He didn't make it 3 steps. Uniformed officers met him at the side entrance. Yaren looked around wildly, as if the room itself had betrayed her. Maybe it had. Maybe rooms got tired of lying too. She turned toward Amara one last time. "You think this means you win?" Amara closed her fingers over the ring in her palm and looked at the woman who had stolen 6 years, who had mistaken fear for strategy and love for weakness. "No," she said. "I think this means you're done." They took Yaren first, then her father. The cameras kept flashing, and somewhere in all of it, Seo-jun finally looked at the boys again. Really looked. Micah leaning against Amara's side, trying to be brave. Jay still watching everything. Toby vibrating with post-heist righteousness. His face did not break. But something in his eyes did. He moved fast. He did not pray. He had stopped praying at 15. But he made something like a promise, to whatever was listening, that if she was breathing when he got there, he would spend the rest of his life making sure she had every reason to keep breathing. Now he was here. Now they were safe. And somehow that promise still stood between them like a vow waiting for better timing. Later, when the ballroom had emptied and the police had finished, and Dami had arrived furious and crying, and kissing all 3 boys on the forehead in rotation, Seo-jun stood alone on the terrace outside the private lounge with the city wind moving cold over the river. Amara found him there. The boys were inside asleep in a nest of coats on a velvet sofa, worn out by justice. For the first time since the gala began, there was no audience, no threat, no cameras, just night, and the soft noise of traffic far below, and the smell of winter in the air. She stopped a few feet away. "You knew," she said. He turned. 2 weeks. Only 2? I saw them at the recital. And you didn't ask. You were already looking at me like I had no right. His honesty hit exactly where it was supposed to. Amara looked out over the river lights. You didn't. I know. Silence. Then she lifted the ring between 2 fingers. Gold in the blue terrace light. Why did you keep it on her hand all these years? His jaw shifted once before he answered. Because removing it publicly without proof would have started a war I couldn't finish cleanly. Because her father still had men in places I needed exposed first. He paused. Because I thought you were safer far from me than half hidden near me, and I hated that enough to be wrong about it. Amara looked at him. There it was. Not excuse. Truth. Ugly and late. Why didn't you find me? I did. She went still. He took 1 step closer. I found the clinic in Busan 3 months after you left. Too late. I found the apartment after that. Empty. His voice stayed level by force. I found out later Yeren had intercepted the first report and buried the second. By then, you had moved again. Amara's fingers tightened around the ring. You searched. For 6 years. The wind pressed cold against her cheek. Inside the lounge, one of the boys turned in his sleep and murmured. She looked back through the glass, then at him. Why? Not because you're different. Not because I've never felt this way. He knew better than that. His eyes stayed on her face. The night we met, he said, you handed me back a ring worth more than your rent, tore up your own apron to stop my hand bleeding, and then told me not to ruin the floor you had to clean. His mouth moved once, not a smile. Something sadder. When the doors opened, you checked on the bellboy behind me before you checked yourself. You did not know my name. You did not care who I was. You just did what was right because it was right. He looked out at the river once, then back. I have had people bow to me, beg me, lie to me, bleed for me because they were paid. His voice dropped. You inconvenienced yourself for me like it cost you nothing. I have been thinking about that ever since. Amara had no answer ready for that, so she gave him another question. What else don't I know? A beat passed, then another. The piano in your classroom, he said. The district cut music funding last year. I bought the instrument through a donor shell before I knew if you would ever speak to me again. Her breath caught. That was you. Yes. You had no right. No. And you did it anyway. Yes. She almost laughed, not because it was funny, because some men apologized with flowers. This one bought a piano so her sons and 20 other children could learn scales in tune. Seo-jun. It was the first time she had said just his name. No title. No distance. His reaction was small if you were not watching carefully. A single inhale. A slight closing of his eyes. But it was there. The hit landed. She stepped closer. He did not move away. Neither did she. What happens now? She asked. He looked at the ring in her hand. Whatever you decide. That sounds unlike you. It is. The honesty in that made something unclench. Very slowly, Amara reached up and touched the side of his face. Cool skin. Roughness at the jaw. A man who had spent too long being hard because softness had once cost too much. He put his hand over hers, not to trap it, just to keep it there. She didn't move away. Neither did he. What happened next was not a beginning. It felt somehow like something returning, like a door that had been closed for a very long time being opened from the inside. If you made it to this moment, first of all, I see you. Drop a yellow heart in the comments, because some endings do not need a part 2 to matter. Some endings just need the right people to survive long enough to reach them. The consequences came fast after that. SEO Yerin was charged with fraud, evidence tampering, coercion, and the attempted abduction caught on 100 phones from 100 angles. Her father resigned before dawn and was arrested by noon. The ring theft became a headline, but not the way she would have wanted. The public loved the triplets. Of course they did. 3 solemn little boys in tiny suits returning a stolen family ring to their mother was the kind of justice people could understand before breakfast. Amara hated the attention. The boys enjoyed exactly 12% too much of it. Life did not become simple. That would have been a lie. But it became honest. And honest was better. 3 weeks later, Amara made the practical decision that told everyone, including herself, that she had chosen a future instead of just surviving a disaster. She signed papers to open a small after-school music and arts room in Itaewon, 2 streets over from the old community center where Seo-jun had first shown up staring at children's drawings like they could save him. The lease was in her name only. The funding was a mix of city restitution grants, her own savings, and one anonymous donation she accepted only after making Sunho confirm, in writing, that it came with no strings, no clauses, and no chance of later becoming a favor. The sign outside read, "The Blue Room." Because the first child drawing Seo-jun had stared at all those years ago had shown blue grass and a purple sky and a sun falling off the paper. Because some broken things deserve to become places instead of wounds. He did not object to the lease being hers. He did not ask her to move into the penthouse. He came with the boys on Saturdays and helped build shelves in a black t-shirt that probably cost more than Amara's first month of rent in Seoul. He learned how Micah liked the nails sorted by size. He learned that Jay asked questions only after already knowing half the answer. He learned that Toby should never, under any circumstance, be left alone near paint. He also learned that plantain chips disappeared from kitchen bowls faster when he pretended not to see small hands taking them. Amara watched him with the boys the way people watched weather at sea, carefully, respectfully, aware that beauty and danger had once shared a name in him. Then, one Saturday afternoon, he did something quiet enough that she nearly missed how large it was. They were all in her apartment kitchen. Sunlight fell through the window in soft strips. The room smelled like fried onions, shea butter, and the cinnamon tea she made when she wanted the day to feel slower than it was. The boys were at the table arguing over crayons. Seo-jun sat in the chair nearest the window, with his back to it. Amara stopped at the stove with the wooden spoon still in her hand. He noticed her noticing. Said nothing. He had once told her he never sat with his back to glass. Not after 19. Not after a gunshot through a restaurant window taught him what carelessness cost. Now here he was, in her too small kitchen. Back to the light. Hands around a chipped mug one of the boys had painted badly and proudly. Trust, from some men, did not look like confession. It looked like posture. She turned back to the pot before the moment became too large to survive. That evening,